The latest on the Menendez brothers. LA's district attorney sent a letter to the governor backing their lawyer's bid for clemency.
The murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez, two murders that happened in 1989, Beverly Hills, California, a very wealthy city, suburb of LA. Everyone knows that. Who did the killing, why the killing was done, the two trials that went on, and then finally some new, I guess you would call it new evidence or new issues that have come up in the case that have called people to take a look at it. There's two criminals that were convicted of murder one and sentenced to life without parole, Lyle and Erik Menendez. Eric says he can't believe they weren't arrested almost immediately. He said, boy, I can't believe we weren't arrested almost immediately, because he says he walked into the house and their parents were dead and it was a smoke-filled room. It was interesting because they had tried to fabricate an alibi which failed miserably. A couple things happened which really caused the downfall of these guys and caused them to be arrested for the murder of their parents. Welcome everyone to Truth Nation. Chief Mark Garrett, how are you?
I'm great. Good morning, good afternoon, good midnight, whatever it is there on your end.
You know, my dad used to, that was his saying. He would say, what would he say? Good morning, good evening, good riddance.
Yeah. I didn't go that far, Bill.
Yeah. Mark, you know, it seems like TikTok is driving, almost, I don't know, it's a driving part of the justice system in this country, right? These kind of waves of public engagement in a case or public sentiment in a case. They start on TikTok. I guess the better way to explain it is, one thing that's going on now is young people looking at old criminal cases, getting involved in looking at old criminal cases and, you know, looking at new evidence, et cetera, and then forming an opinion and putting it out there on TikTok. And it gets traction. We're going to talk today about the case of the murder of Jose and Kitty Menendez, a murder that happened in two murders that happened in 1989. Beverly Hills, California, a very wealthy city, suburb of LA. Everyone knows that. Who did the killing, why the killing was done, the two trials that went on, and then finally some new, I guess you would call it new evidence or, you know, new issues that have come up in the case that have called people to take a look at it. And here's two criminals that were convicted of murder one and sentenced to life without parole. And in my opinion, they're probably going to get out of jail here in the future, in the near future.
And we'll talk about money. I bet you're right.
Yeah, and we'll talk about how that is. There's a couple different avenues, but starting first, Mark, boy, 1989, I was not in LA. I had just graduated college, unemployed, looking for a job. So if you were out here, you know, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this. It was August 20th, 89. Mm-hmm. Beverly Hills, where was it? 722 North Elm Drive. Nice part of Beverly Hills. Very, very nice house. 911 call, and it's a teenager saying, someone killed my parents, someone killed my parents. And the 911 operator is almost confused by the statement. Like, wait a minute, what happened? What are you telling me? And I guess that goes to show how unusual a crime was at that time. Even by today's standards, you know, there's more probably home invasion type crimes today in LA and the suburbs. But even by today's standards, when police get there, what they see really shocks them. And did you remember this case? Like, I guess the word is contemporaneously. Like, I know you weren't involved in law enforcement yet. Maybe you were in Northern California at this time. But do you remember when this went down? Like, what the initial thoughts were about this case?
Yeah, I remember it very well. You're right. Actually, I was in the hiring process for the Highway Patrol at the time. So, I had an interest, obviously, in law enforcement. And the funny thing is, Bill, is my brother, before he was a Long Beach police officer, and then before he was a 30-year member of the LA City Fire Department, he was briefly an officer for the Beverly Hills Police Department. So when this murder, and just a couple of years before the murder occurred, my brother was there and then decided to go to Long Beach PD. But so when we heard, double homicide in Beverly Hills, it struck a nerve on a couple of levels. One, how unusual is this, a crime of this magnitude in Beverly Hills? And second, geez, my brother Danny was a cop there just recently. So I remember it very well.
Yeah. Um, interesting. The police get there. It's, as I said, it's a gruesome murder scene. The weapon that was used was a shotgun, multiple buckshot rounds, and I would say the parents were probably Kitty and Jose Menendez. Probably what, Mark, in their late 40s at that
Late
time?
40s.
Late
Uh-huh.
40s?
Yeah,
Um,
I believe she was a year or two older, so late 40s, right around 50 or so. Yeah.
and two children are there, Lyle and Eric Menendez. Lyle is the older one. I want to say he was ballpark 22 years old at the time of the murders. Does that
It's
sound about
21 or
right?
22.
21
Yeah.
or 22.
Mm-hmm.
And Eric Menendez, younger brother, 19, maybe
Mm-hmm.
18, 19 years old, something like
Yep.
that. A couple years younger than him. Um, One thing that's interesting is, and I guess this maybe goes to this type of crime in this type of neighborhood, right? Is the police never really initially, at least on that first, the night of the crime, never really treated them as suspects, or to quote Pam Bozanich, the prosecutor who tried the first case, she said they were treated very nicely. And there
Yeah.
were some things that were missed. They turned out to be, I think, inconsequential. But for instance, um, one of the kids, one of the sons, had shotgun shells in the trunk of his car, and his car was in the driveway. The car wasn't searched, and that would have been, a pretty big tell when there's shotgun shells in the car and maybe receipts for where stuff was bought, etc. Um, they they were interviewed like that night or the next day. And I think it was Eric who, by the way, today Eric says he can't believe they weren't arrested almost immediately.
Yeah.
Right, that was his
Yeah.
statement in a recent Netflix 2-hour documentary. He said, "Boy, I can't believe we weren't arrested almost immediately," because he says he walked into the house and their parents were dead, and it was a smoke-filled room. Now, this was, by all accounts, about an hour or more after the shooting, right? So there would have
Correct.
been no gunpowder in the air. There would have been no smoke in the air. And his thing is like, man, the cops should have probably seen that. The other thing that wasn't done, according to the prosecutor, Bozanich, is a gunpowder residue test, right?
Yeah.
Swabbing the skin, the hands of the sons. And, although a shotgun, a little different result than you would get from especially a revolver or a semi-automatic pistol, I'm sure probably there would have been something there if they did a gunshot residue test. They
Oh, I have
didn't
no
do it.
doubt.
Yeah,
I
right.
have no
Even with a
doubt. There's
shotgun,
still,
Mark.
yeah, I think even with a shotgun and possibly, on the forearm area of the ejection port side of the gun, I think it's very likely that there was some type of residue there.
Right. And it was interesting because they had tried to fabricate an alibi, which failed miserably. Right. They went to a movie theater and tried, after a movie started, tried to buy tickets for it, and their thought was, let's say the movie started at 10, we get there at 10:45, we'll buy tickets for the 10 o'clock movie, and we'll have those ticket stubs, and we can say, no, we were there at the beginning of the movie. Well, the movie theater wouldn't sell them those tickets, so they bought tickets for another movie, and then they decided that was just a stupid idea, and they went to a restaurant and spent a couple hours in a restaurant. I mean, all of this is really irrelevant, but it does show that and I think it's important to note this, Mark. It shows that their intent was to cover up the crime. It wasn't like they,
100%.
right, and that is important in this case. It's not like they killed their parents and called the police and sat down and said, "Here's what happened. Come to our house." Which in other cases we have seen that happen, right? We have
Yes, we have.
seen, and we'll get into what I mean by that, but we have seen that happen in other cases. So,
And Bill, I'd like to go back because you
yeah.
said something about the prosecutor in the first trial, Pam, when even she said, well, some of these things the cops did not do or did do initially were probably, very inconsequential. Well, I disagree with that. I disagree with when I watched it in the documentary, because the secretion of those shotgun shells in the trunk of the car, same thing. It goes to the mindset of covering up a crime. So I think that, and now, is it consequential in the ultimate outcome of the second trial? No, because they got the verdict they were looking for, the prosecution. But initially, it certainly would have set the mindset, I think, of the investigators and probably the perpetrators. In other words, there'd have been a lot less time had they been confronted with evidence to start formulating stories and things like this. So that's just my take on it so far.
No, that's very interesting. And even to that point, Eric says today, or recently in the past year and a half, he says that had they put pressure on him in an interview, he would have folded. He said,
Correct.
I would have confessed. If they had put pressure on me, I would have confessed. But as the prosecutor said, they were treated very nicely. After the crime, I guess they tell police, Mark, that they think it's a mafia hit, which is also kind of bizarre in and of itself. You know what I mean? That these two, young 20-year-old and teenager saying that their parents were murdered and they suspect it's a mafia hit because he had many business enemies, etc. And I don't know how much, I don't know what was in the mind of the investigators, Mark, whether they were really pursuing that part of the case or whether they had thought these boys were suspects in the first place and were just trying to kind of play it cool. But a couple things happened which really caused the downfall of these guys and caused them to be arrested for the murder of their parents. First, which brought attention to him, was a spending spree, right? They bought and I don't know if that money came from a life insurance policy that was paid out relatively quickly, or if it was just some kind of family money that they then had access to or whatever. By the way, there was a $14 million estate.
Right.
And, the prosecutors will later claim that was the motive for the murders. What'd they buy? They bought a brand new Porsche, a Jeep Wrangler. They each bought Rolex watches. So, this was something that kind of raised people's eyebrows. Like, wow, these guys are still, and I think they continued living in the house. Mark, am I right about that?
That's correct. Yep.
So living in the house where your parents were murdered and, spending exorbitant spending, let's just call it that, exorbitant spending. At one point, I think they did live in a hotel, a very high-end Beverly Hills hotel for a while. The other thing was Eric Menendez, right? So previously, he had a run-in with the law. Was it burglary, Mark? Do you remember the details on that?
Yes, it was burglary. As a matter of fact, I should know this. I believe it was at least multiple allegations, but I know that he was charged with at least one burglary. And in other words, I don't want to get ahead of the game here, but we're talking about.
Oh, go ahead. I think.
Yeah, we're talking about mindset. I do want to talk about this, and forgive me for getting ahead of the game, but it's very interesting, Bill, because we look at how the police, like I said, the prosecutor said that the police treated them very nicely. Initially at the scene, we saw a lot of this. People may disagree with me, but with O.J. Simpson, we saw this where you get the celebrity, or you get something that it's very much out of the ordinary, a double homicide in Beverly Hills, where law enforcement is not used to dealing with, these types of investigations. And I think, for lack of a better word, they either get starstruck or they just, in other words, a blow to the face, because it's so substantial, it's so new, that they can't conceive of someone like this committing these types of crimes. But to me, it's basic investigation. And then when you look back about the criminal history there, Eric, you would think, start putting two to two together. The other thing is that anybody in law enforcement who's investigated, these types of crimes, talking about murder specifically, almost always, and Pam talks about this in documentary, but it's Cop 101, almost always when you have these types of crimes, it's someone that the victims know. And then even more directly, it's probably someone in the family. So it was very substantial that this escaped law enforcement, or even if it didn't escape in their mind, they chose not to follow up on some of the obvious stuff. Just think it was massive oversight.
Yeah, that's a great point, because there was no forced entry to the house. And there was one, and nothing was stolen, right?
Correct.
Nothing was stolen, and that's a great point that Bozanich did make, is that these are normally, unfortunately, it's normally it's someone you know or a family member that commits the crime. So there was a criminal history, and the reason and by the way, Mark, it's a great point you bring up, because again, the prosecutor Bozanich calls this case the OJ case before the OJ case. And I feel like, it is amazing that almost how so many cases tie back to the OJ Simpson case. And, there were two trials in this case, and we'll go through the first one, what happened in the second one. But the first one was pre-OJ. The second one was after OJ, and they were handled very different. And it was because of, in my opinion, that OJ Simpson verdict. Mm-hmm. And ironically, the other case that's, kind of always in the background in LA prosecution's Rodney King case. The judge from the initial case on the officers was the presiding judge at the first trial. So it's amazing how those two cases are kind of weaved into the justice fabric of LA County, and and have caused the reaction those cases caused has had such an effect on the justice system in LA County for some time.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Bill.
Yeah, so the reason I brought up the burglaries was they were caught, right? Eric was caught, and I don't know if Lyle was involved in that or not. It doesn't seem like it.
I don't think so.
No, but Eric was caught, and part of the agreement or plea deal or whatever it was, sentencing, if you want to call it, was he was to see a psychologist or psychiatrist. And his father apparently sought out, this is according to one of the sons, one of the suspects or one of the convicted murderers, said that Jose Menendez sought out this specific psychiatrist named Oziel because he made an agreement to disclose whatever the son told him to the father. So in the therapy sessions, whatever the son disclosed to the psychiatrist, this psychiatrist had an agreement with the dad that he would tell the dad what the kid said. Now, there's some, is that ethical is the question, right? Is that ethical to do that? And that kind of, the brothers kind of say that that's a negative for this guy Oziel and why he has no credibility and he was just out for money and et cetera, et cetera. But why I bring this whole thing up is after killing his parents, Eric started, I guess he was feeling suicidal. He went and visited this same psychiatrist and confessed to the crime. Mm-hmm. And man, talk about, you almost couldn't write a screenplay that would be this unbelievable, right? The psychiatrist, he confesses to the crime. His brother comes in, and I'm kind of summarizing some of the stuff, Mark. If there's anything I leave out, jump in. His brother comes in, the psychiatrist records these sessions, and really this is where I think the boys start putting their defense together and talking about why they say this murder happened. But the interesting thing is, the psychiatrist he's married, he's having an affair with a woman. He has this woman come in to try to witness this. This woman moves in his house with him and his wife. Just a crazy, crazy situation with this psychiatrist. And again, it's because Eric had seen this guy in the past and was, suicidal or having difficulty dealing, obviously, with killing his parents, went to see him. But was that, how crazy was that part of the story, that it was this psychiatrist's girlfriend who actually went to the police and said, hey, my boyfriend is a psychiatrist for these guys, and they confessed to the murder.
Yeah, it's a yarn that you can't, we wouldn't conceive of weaving unless we're doing some type of a complete, fictional movie in Hollywood. The problem with these types of things, we're talking about credibility. First of all, we said, is it unethical for the psychiatrist or psychologist, whatever he was, a mental health care professional, I forget which one it was, to do this. And I would imagine there are probably some exceptions for, underage children, juveniles, things like this, as far as consulting with the parent about what's said. But, Eric was an adult. And for what I know, as a total layman, like most everybody else listening, and maybe we can have a psychiatrist, psychologist comment on this, but I think
Hmm.
it's completely unethical that a therapist would be communicating with someone other than uh, his patient, with rare exception. And one of those exceptions, of course, would be if the information that the therapist receives is of criminal behavior and could be a public threat. They are actually bound by law to disclose those types of things to law enforcement. And this would be an example of where he could have done it, legally and through protocol to do that. But when you get to trial, and they did, they raked this guy over the coals because he had engaged in multiple examples of poor judgment, of dishonesty, of
Right.
disloyalty, of betrayal. And so now they're saying, you're telling us that he confessed to you, but he said the girlfriend, ironically, was the one that gave us more credibility because she's an outside party hearing this. But yeah, it's a completely a terribly complicated, complex ball of wax because of his lack of credibility. But it
Yeah.
is what broke the case.
It is what, yeah, that's definitely what broke the case. And then I think when the police had this information, the prosecutor was like, "Hey, you gotta find me the guns, either the guns that were used or where they were bought or something." And somehow they did locate where the guns were purchased. They were purchased in San Diego, which is
Yes.
I don't really know how they did that, but interesting that they discovered that.
Well, you know
Um,
what? And I want to jump in here because
yeah,
it's an interesting thing. We talk about, the necessity for ID, for voting and things like this, which obviously I'm a big supporter of. But apparently they use the ID of a friend
hmm,
to, and they never, and I read a little bit, so I didn't, it's kind of glossed over, but how they did it. But they obtained the ID from an acquaintance from a friend to purchase these guns, so it wouldn't be under their name. So I'm assuming, because I don't know otherwise, I'm assuming that there's somebody who looks very much like one of the brothers. I think it was Lyle, I believe. And so they were able to make this purchase through um, uh, false identification. These guns, so it wouldn't be tracked back to them again. It goes to the mindset of them, of their premeditation and their clear mindset that what they're about to engage in is not only illegal, but beyond that, appropriate in a moral sense. In other words, because this is what they go to later on. We'll talk about that.
yeah,
But they were pre-flighting this. They had plenty of time to cool off, things like this, and they
yep,
went through very meticulous, very deliberate steps to commit this crime.
yep. And as such, right, they were arrested on March 16th, 1990, arrested in Beverly Hills. So what is that? That's 7 months later,
Yeah, I believe it was
six,
something
seven
like that.
months. I mean,
Hmm.
that's quite a while for quite a while later for a case like this. They're they're arrested. They're charged. I mean, hey, the prosecutors feel they have the motive. This $14 million insurance policy. They have the purchase of the guns. And they have the confession through the psychiatrist, so they feel like they have a pretty tight case. You ever have? What do you think of Leslie Abramson, Mark?
Well, look, I think there's a fine line between often, especially in the courtroom, of brilliance and deception. Um, and they certainly can go hand in hand. They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Johnny Cochran's a fine example of that. He was a brilliant lawyer, but I think that he was a liar. And I think, for the most part, the same is true for Abramson. I think that she was incredibly passionate. She was unyielding. Um, but again, where I stand, this kind of stuff, Bill, everybody is entitled to a vigorous defense.
Hmm.
But when I, I think that she crossed the line with a lot of the things that she said that I read about and saw in documentaries. But look, if I were in their shoes, or if I went OJ Simpson's shoes, would I hire her? Would I hire a Johnny Cochran? Damn right, because I've already committed a murder. So who do I care who I hire as long as it can get me off? So
Right.
was she effective? Clearly, she was.
Yeah. So she was, I think, Eric's lawyer, and Jill Lansing was Lyle's lawyer. Now, the first
Hmm.
trial was 1993, so they had already been
Yeah.
in custody 3 years plus when the first
Yeah.
trial started, and this was the very early days of court TV, and this was one of the first televised trials. And again, that goes into probably how some things were handled, and how it was really reality TV of 1993. Like, this murder trial was reality TV of 1993. And in the opening statements, they really acknowledged that the boys committed the murders, but said it was done out of fear. And they kind of started telling this story of a lifetime of abuse, and how these murders were what goes on to become something called imperfect self-defense.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding of imperfect self-defense is, if, let's say, a reasonable person on the outside might not think that there's danger, right? Like, you and I, looking at it from the outside, wouldn't think that a reasonable person may not think that they had to kill their parents to alleviate this danger or this fear. But they honestly thought that. So that would be termed imperfect self-defense. Although it wasn't logical, that's what they believed. And that was kind of what they, what they put their money on. The boys say really it was just self-defense. I think the lawyers kind of termed it this imperfect self-defense, where it might not be logical for people on the outside to look at it. But their story was this, lifetime of abuse, and upbringing caused them to kill their parents. And part of that, there was one specific part of that really, I don't know, it really didn't have credibility with me. It was one of the two boys, I don't know, and they were talking about the night of the murder, and like having this argument with their parents about something, and saying in their mind, if they didn't get the guns and go down to the study to kill their parents before their parents left that study and headed up to them, they were going to be killed. And that just doesn't sound, based on the story that was told, that just doesn't sound at all like a logical thought. But that's what they kind of banked on. No?
Yeah, there are a few things that I think go to the credibility of their abuse story or stories. But Bill, I think what you said right there is the most important example, in my opinion, I think in your opinion as well, as really inconsistency from reality, or inconsistency with reality. If they thought that serious harm or death to them were imminent, if they really thought that were the case, they could have simply, I'm not talking about moving to Spain.
Yeah.
I'm simply saying they could have walked outside.
Yep.
They could have stood in the sidewalk to figure out, what are we going to do?
Yep.
To go from that point. Now, one of the things they said in trial was, I don't know if it was the first time, and this is their claim.
Mm-hmm.
The first time that their mom, Kitty, had openly sided with their father and said, something to the effect of, yeah, you guys will be in, deep doo-doo if you carry on with this or divulge this. I've known about it all the time. And in other words, they're saying that at this point, the mom was fully on board and they were afraid of her as well.
Right.
In other words, it's all too convenient that it's at this point, they have to kill them both because she is compliant. They also said later on that she was so devoted to her husband, their father, that if he died, that she would be in deep depression. She would have nothing to live for, blah, 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 blah. So they decided to do the humane thing and kill her too. I mean, at this point, it can be very difficult, because when you watch them on the stand, and I think especially Eric, he's breaking down, crying, things like these things can be very, very emotionally moving. They can be very impactful, I'm sure, to a jury. But when you look at earlier statements and the description of the scene and their reasoning, man, it does not go well with the whole abuse thing. And it does not explain why they simply could not walk away from a threat. If you and I thought there was somebody, even in our own house, that was going to kill us, if we went upstairs and went to bed,
Mm-hmm.
the very, very least we would do was to get our ass out of the house.
Right.
That's the very least. And they could have done that. So I call bull crap on it.
Yep. And that's a key point that I'm glad you brought up, was just why not just leave? Here's what's interesting, and I don't know if this is the other side of it or whatever, but Bozanich, the prosecutor on this first case, she said she could not find a character witness for Jose Menendez, right? And, I think a quote from her was, that's because he was an awful man who raised two sons capable of murder, you know? So interesting that there was no one out there in the community that was going to say, no, this guy was a good guy. The boys say he was horrible, and I like your description of their reasons for killing the mom. I think you're spot on that. That made no sense. It was almost like I don't know, euthanasia or a mercy killing or something. Like she wouldn't be able to function without the father, and we have to kill the father, so therefore we're going to kill you. Doesn't make any sense. Lyle testifies first about the sexual abuse, and from statements that jurors made later, it sounds like he was pretty believable. Like the jury believed him. And I think for the prosecution, that was kind of an oh crap moment. Would you agree with that, Mark, when the first kid took the stand?
Oh, 100%, Bill. 100%. Like I said, he was very believable on the stand. Even looking back on it now and having my opinions, I could certainly see why a jury, if not finding reason to fully acquit someone or things like that, they certainly had a reason maybe to be sympathetic to him. Absolutely.
Right. And this is where the term sweater defense came up, right? Take two wealthy white kids from Beverly Hills, put sweaters on them, and give them nice haircuts and put them on the stand and have them cry, and the jury will feel some kind of connection to them and believe what they're saying. Here's what one thing I want to ask you about, Mark, because especially with the latest information that we're eventually going to get to here, but there was a family relative that testified in the first trial, right? A woman. And she said that Lyle had confessed to her what was going on once when she visited the house, and that she immediately called the mom to come to the room and told the mom, and the mom just dismissed it and grabbed Lyle and took him back upstairs or whatever. Did you catch that? And do you think there was credibility in that, or did that have any impact on you?
Well, it had an impact on me in the sense that I'm looking at this from, a former investigator like you were. So in other words, I put myself in the jury box. And if you have someone now that is confirming or collaborating a statement, of a defendant or another witness here, obviously it gives a lot more credibility. My problem with it is that, again, it's still simply a statement. Statements can be very, very important. But there's no way of knowing, number one, if there's any collaboration with her and anybody on the defense team or one of the sons or both of the sons, or if she has simply been aware of their defense. It's very easy for her to say that, yes, that they confided in me X amount of years ago. It's very, very difficult to exclude that possibility. And it's like everything else, you have to look at all the evidence statements in totality. So do I think that the whole trial did or should have hinged on her statement? Absolutely not. Was there certainly an element here to sway the jury? Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. I mean, interesting. So now we have the two boys saying there was sexual abuse. And to be clear, I mean, I didn't say this. Her testimony was that Lyle had told her about the sexual abuse, and that she immediately got the mom, and the mom kind of dismissed it. And so,
and of course, but the thing is, there's no way for Kitty Menendez to refute this, because this witness here, the relative, can, and again, I'm not saying she did make the story up, but she could make up any story she wants to regarding conversations with the decedents, and it is what it is.
And Bozanich, the prosecutor who handled this first case, in her opinion, the whole defense is fabricated. I mean, she says that in this documentary. She
did, and she was passionate about it. As a matter of fact, Bill, She said, I don't know why she couldn't or wouldn't go into detail, but she alluded to the fact that there is so much I could tell you. I'm paraphrasing,
Right.
that I can't or I won't. But if you knew the whole truth, you'd understand why this is all BS.
So here's what was interesting about this first case, and I don't know, Mark, maybe you know a little more about how these things are done than I do.
I doubt it, but let's give it a
Well,
shot.
one of the options was first degree murder. When it went to the jury, I should put it like that. One of the options was first degree murder, but in this first trial, there was also the option of manslaughter, right? So what happened is this is January of '94 when we finally get around to this case going to the jury. They take a vote in the jury room. All the men vote for murder and all the women vote for manslaughter. So to be clear, this was not a guilty, not guilty, what would you call it? Scenario. Yeah, perfect. Not a guilty, not guilty scenario. This was, they definitely killed the parents. Is it more fitting the charge of murder one, or is it more fitting the manslaughter charge? And they could not break that deadlock. It started 6-6, men versus women, murder versus manslaughter, and they couldn't get past that, and it ended in a mistrial. The first trial ended in a mistrial.
And this, by the way, this is after a full month of deliberation.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, yeah.
So Garcetti's the district attorney at the time. He says, we're going to charge it again. We're going to look for, it's a capital case. We're going to look for the death penalty again. When you look at that case and you see the 6-6 and how the jury was broken down, is there a lesson that should have been learned there, that was learned there for the second trial, or what do you take from that when that case finished in that manner?
Well, I don't know from a prosecution point of view, or defense for that matter. I'm not sure if there is a lesson to be learned. There may be some realities, but let me tell you this. There's a huge industry it's called, jury consultants,
right?
And that work for both the defense and prosecution when we're picking juries. And they go through all the questioning, things like this, and the consultant tells either side, oh, this is going to be a great person for our side, and pick them, or don't pick this person. They're gonna go the other direction, things like this. I'm telling you right now, Bill, and I do have experience talking to prosecutors, about this, and I could get some disagreement from lawyers, but from my experience, that they're worthless, that it's a crapshoot. Sometimes they pick great juries for a particular side. Sometimes they don't. Juries are, in my opinion, an unknown quantity. It is rolling the dice. And I've been there where you think, someone's watching your testimony for a week and you think, oh my God, this person, oh yeah, they're loving, the testimony and blah, blah, whatever. I've been there in the witness stand. They turn out and vote 180 degrees against, what you're saying. And then other people who you think that they're looking at you like they're rolling their eyes, and they vote the other direction. You just don't know. So I don't know if there's a lesson here. I think what it indicates, certainly, I think it's hard to dispute this, this position, is that the men here inherently have a different perspective, that they're a lot less sympathetic for, wait a minute, you had a rough life. I'm putting that in quotes, multi-millionaire kids, best schools, and tennis star preparation, and no. And you're saying that maybe this happened to you, maybe you were molested and blah, blah, blah. So what you chose to do was to first of all, go out and legally purchase a firearm, go upstairs, get it, come back down and kill your parents on the couch in blood. By the way, Bill, and I know I'm kind of all over the place, other lessons learned here. If I'm not mistaken, this just popping in my mind right now from memory. I believe that the father was shot in the knee or knees. One of them, I believe, was shot before they were actually killed. In other words, torture. I believe. Now, I could be wrong about that, but the point is that the men in the jury clearly did not excuse their behavior based on maybe even some horrible things that happened. That what they did was inappropriate, even given the worst circumstances. Their behavior was still inappropriate, and it was premeditated, which we know it was premeditated 100%. Um, the women, on the other hand, gave them a ton of leeway for alleged suffering, previously. So, is there a lesson to be learned here? I don't know. Maybe men are a little more logical and a little less emotional. Please send your hate comments to me for saying that, but that's my take on it.
No, I think you're right about that. So this was, as I said, this was January '94. There's a mistrial, and again, so people understand, that doesn't mean that the defendants go free in a mistrial. They're still held, and the government, in this case, the County of Los Angeles, says we're going to try them again. So that starts, the second trial starts in October '95. So I don't know, close to 2 years later, almost. I mean, close to, close to 2 years or a year and a half later. Here's what was interesting. In that time was the OJ case, and you alluded to it earlier. I alluded to it earlier, and Leslie Abramson said, "Oh crap!" Right? That was her when they asked her about the OJ case and the verdict there and the effect she thought it would have on their trial. She said, "Oh crap," meaning there, or I think she even said there's going to be retaliation, or there's going to be now this urge that, quote, celebrities, and really, I don't see how you term these two kids celebrities. You know, but throughout history now, it's been called a celebrity murder. It's really not. It's rich teenagers, or a rich teenager and rich 20-something.
I think, ironically, Bill, is that the trials themselves turned them into celebrities.
Made them celebrities, right?
Yeah, I wouldn't call them famous. I certainly call them infamous at this point. They were certainly known, throughout the country, maybe worldwide. So they had kind of become celebrities because of this.
Right. Interesting. So here's what changed for the second trial. No television. That was number one. They had seen what happened with this case. They saw what happened with the OJ case. And I don't know the ins and outs of how that decision was made or what happened, but no, there was no trial in the second trial.
No TV.
I'm sorry, thank you. No TV in the second trial. The battered women syndrome, the judge made some finding to the effect that it doesn't apply to men. Am I on track with that?
Yeah, you're totally on track with it.
Okay, and he limited the, quote, abuse excuse. He really limited what they could use from the history of abuse. The other thing was Lyle did not testify in the second case, and the reason for that was in the interim time since the first trial or since he'd been in jail, he was speaking to this woman, and I don't know if she was she an author, Mark, or like a reporter?
I believe she was an author.
And he made comments to her like
this is from county jail. He's on the phone with her,
right? And all the calls, good point. All the calls for county jail are recorded, and I think she was recording the calls as well. Now that I think of it, and he said things like, "Hey, I would lie if I have to, or I could be real convincing in a lie," things like that. Now, my understanding is this couldn't be used in the case in chief. They couldn't put these tapes on, but if he were to take the stand and testify, they could cross-examine him with these statements about him being willing to lie and being a good liar, etc. So the decision was made. He didn't testify. Just Eric testified. The testimony of the relative that we spoke about 10 minutes ago, that was banned. She was not allowed to testify in the second case. And this is the big one, Mark, is there was no manslaughter charge this time. They just said murder one or nothing. And I think that was a key tactical decision because, so look at it this way. They tried to disable the defense that the boys had used last time, and then kind of said, like, even if that defense is successful again, we're going to remove that option to charge manslaughter and basically force them to either say murder or go free, right?
Yeah. It's interesting, Bill, because you made such a good point earlier about how all these cases in Southern California, um, the Menendez case, which again, basically now over kind of 6 years from the murder to the second trial. And before the second trial, we've had the OJ trial, and we've had the state Rodney King trial with the police officers. And what you're talking about right now is so relevant because in the second case with the Menendez brothers, the judge gave the jury a very stark option. It's first degree murder or it's acquittal. That's all. That's it. That's all you can do. Well, a similar thing happened with the Rodney King officers because in that state trial, there was no option to convict these officers of misdemeanors. It was felonies only. Now, there was one exception. I think Bristino, one of the officers, there was a misdemeanor charge that was available for him. He did convicted of a misdemeanor, which is very, very important because when the jury saw an opportunity to convict him of a lesser crime, they took it. But the other officers it was felonies for them or acquittal. And I think, we can talk about the Rodney King case all day long, but the problem was that the jury saw the entire Rodney King tape. They felt certainly that Rodney King was culpable to some extent for exacerbating the situation. The other two passengers or occupants in the car complied. There was no use of force, blah, 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 whatever. So to say, wait a minute, we send these guys to prison or we let them go. They decided to let them go. The idea that this didn't have some type of effect on this second jury, I agree with you. It was all in the soup at this point. And I don't care how much you want to be sequestered or you're asked these questions about, does any other case affect this? It's impossible to get a completely sterile jury. So I think all of these cases had an effect on this trial.
And just to tag onto that, Mark, this is something I mentioned earlier, but I'll say it again. Stanley Weisberg, the judge in this matter, was the judge on the Rodney King case, right? Correct. So he saw what you're talking about firsthand. And according to Bozanich, the prosecutor, she kind of said or maybe it was the boys, actually. I don't remember who said this. The Menendez kids said the judge wanted a decision this time. The judge wanted a decision. So from his part, he was going to steer the case to either guilty, not guilty, no mistrial.
Yep.
So I don't know how long the jury is out for, but there's no issue this time, right? The case goes on. They get convicted of first-degree murder. They are sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, and they're off to jail. And boy, they've done 35 years now total, I guess, right?
Yeah, when you go back to their original lockup, they've really never been out of jail or prison since 1989.
So a couple things have happened recently to kind of shine the spotlight on this case again, and which leads back to what we said when we started the show, which was these guys might be getting out, in the very near future, or at least within a year or so. The TikTok movement. So a couple pieces of evidence or a couple things have come out recently, and people have used social media to kind of amplify them and put them out there. And it's caused this big movement among young people to free the Menendez brothers, right? And I think, probably to talk about what these two things are is crucial. And then, get your thoughts if you think they have any bearing, or where things go from here. So the first piece of evidence is a letter. Okay, now it's a letter that was written prior to the killings by, I think, Eric Menendez to a cousin of his named Andres Cano. And Andres died in 2003, I think, somewhere around then. Drug issues, right? And after his death, a reporter had reached out to Andres's mother, Martha Mendez Cano, so Jose Menendez Cano, Jose's sister, and asked to talk to her. And she said, hey, you can look through Andres' stuff. And he's looking through the stuff, and he finds this letter that apparently the mom Martha didn't even know existed. And this is a letter from Eric to her son Andres. And, I don't know. I think here's a couple quotes from the letter, Mark. The writer of the letter says, "It's still happening, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen. Every night I stay up thinking he might come in. He warned me 100 times about telling someone. I need to put it out of my mind. I don't know if I'll make it through." I pulled that from a couple different parts of the letter. I know when I read it like that, it sounds like it's all one thought, but that was a couple different thoughts throughout the letter. So the theory is that this letter written prior to the murders substantiates their claim that there was sexual abuse going on, and that he didn't think he would survive it, whatever that means, mentally, physically, whatever. That's the first piece of evidence. The second piece is from someone named Roy Rossello. He is a former teenage member of the band Menudo. And Jose Menendez, I guess, when he was an executive at RCA, represented that band or signed that band to a contract. This is from Garagos, the attorney. The attorney, Mark Garagos, in speaking with Roy Rossello, and apparently this is in a signed statement or in a deposition or something to that effect. He says that he was sexually assaulted when he was 13 or 14 years old by Jose Menendez, and that it happened on multiple occasions. Mm-hmm. So, pretty significant. Someone outside the family with no connection to the family it doesn't sound like he had any relationship with the Menendez kids, Lyle or Eric. He's coming forward, and for what reason, for what gain would he have for coming forward and making these statements and saying that he was sexually assaulted by Jose Menendez? So those two things, the defense is now saying they're taking a couple different. Well, first of all, Mark, let me ask you, when you hear those two things, I don't know if you knew about the details of them prior to now or not. Does that cause you to, I don't want to say, does it cause you to look at guilt or innocence differently? Because we know they killed their parents. Does it cause you to look at the issues of abuse differently? And does it bring more credibility to those issues? And do you say, wait a minute, maybe this case is more appropriately charged as a manslaughter case?
Well, to the first question about credibility, absolutely it brings more credibility. We need to be very, very objective. If the letter is authentic, and the one that was written to the cousin, and certainly if the information from the Menudo band member is authentic, these pieces of evidence each bring, and together even more, a tremendous amount of credibility to the claims of sexual abuse. That's number one. Number two, to the appropriateness of the conviction of first-degree murder. I'm not sure if you actually asked it that way, so I apologize. But looking back at the evidence we talked about, by the way, I didn't know about the Menudo thing. You just brought it up, so it's a very powerful thing. It's something for me to digest. But given the circumstances, if what they claim happened to them actually happened, in my mind, it still does not change the inappropriateness and the lawlessness of their action. Would this be a manslaughter case to me? If everything we're hearing now is accurate and everything they said is true about the abuse, should this have been charged and adjudicated as a manslaughter case? In my opinion, absolutely not. This is still a murder case to me. Now, could we look at a second-degree murder as opposed to a first-degree murder? Maybe. Would I call that inappropriate? I don't know, whatever. But I'm very, very comfortable still with the first-degree charge and the first-degree conviction. Absolutely.
So, Mark, how about this? Because this is a case that we probably see somewhere in the United States once a year, a couple times a year.
At least.
A father A young child is abused, sexually abused. A father takes revenge and kills the abuser, premeditated, right? Is that a first degree murder charge, or do you see that as some kind of extenuating circumstance? The abuse of a child, of this individual's child, do you see that as an extenuating circumstance that changes the charge to manslaughter or murder two or something?
Yeah. And again, I'm not a lawyer, but I'll put it this way. It certainly depends on the circumstances, the
Right.
specific circumstances. Beyond that, Bill, we often see a spouse, namely a wife,
Hmm.
um, actually killing a father, their partner, in
Hmm.
defense of a child. They're not even the specific victims. Of course,
Right.
almost always they're also victims of spousal abuse. If the child's being abused, abuse unfortunately goes hand in hand. And we often see manslaughter being charged in those cases because the person, especially again, we're talking about often women here, can specifically articulate clearly that if I don't stop this behavior, that it's not only my life that's in danger, more importantly, it's my child's life. I can't control where my husband or my partner is going to be and what action he may take. And they can articulate true fear and an urgency to stop the behavior right now by taking this type of action to kill somebody. So I'm not saying there is never a defense for, an argument for manslaughter, or maybe even a defense of a justified homicide in some
Hmm.
cases. Certainly, if the behavior is taking place right now and it's timely, you have to stop the behavior right now, or it's imminent. It is imminent. They're coming into my room or things like this, or they're abusing the child right now. Those are, to my mind, for the most part, justifiable homicides. But again, this is a case where they took tremendous and clear premeditated actions to murder both of their parents, and not in the face of immediate danger. And again, these are both adults, young adults. Um, you're telling me that they couldn't, someone's telling me they could not find a different way to remedy this by walking out of the house, by going to the authorities, things like this. Now, I know they're talking about, well, my father is very powerful. He was very influential. He had all types of, friends in the media and things like this in government. And who's going to believe us? And we're going to be ruined. He's still going to find a way to come kill us if he told us he could come kill us.
Mm.
That could all be true. But I'm sorry that they are in these circumstances, allegedly. But there are still other ways to remedy this than blowing your parents' heads off with a shotgun.
Right. And I think one thing we didn't mention, Mark, and probably should have back at the beginning, was Eric Menendez had written a screenplay with a friend. Do you remember that? Hearing about that or not?
That escapes me.
So here's the story. Probably, I don't know, a year or so, 2 years before the murders, he had written a screenplay with a friend.
Yes.
About kids that kill their parents.
Correct.
For
they did
the
come
money.
Back to me. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, that's like originally on this case, that was the thing that I couldn't get past, right? I couldn't get past the fact that that they had actually, or at least Eric had really, thought out a specific plan for killing parents for financial gain, right?
Mm-hmm.
On the other side of it, went back to the abuse and how that fits into a case. I think if you take, when you say, hey, I'm not a lawyer, I don't know exactly how it should be charged, but at some point, I feel like, and this is probably the unknown of the jury, that there's an emotional component that comes in when there's abuse, and jury members or you and I or whoever, at some point, each person has their line and they're going to say, well, that was justified in that case, So for some people, maybe this case fits that bill. For some, it does not. But right now, let's just wrap it up by talking about a few things that are going on in this case, the avenues to get these brothers released from state prison here. And part of it's political, right? Part of it's probably political. The first thing is a habeas motion was filed by Garagos, a lawyer representing at least one of them. I don't know if he represents both of them or just one of them. But they're citing this new evidence, the letter that I talked about, and the allegations of abuse by the member of Menudo, and they're saying that there should be another trial, or the verdict should be set aside. There should be a new trial. That's method one. That thing's been pending now for quite a while. And again, these documentaries that have come out have really shed light on the new allegations and kind of ratcheted up the pressure. I think the TikTok generation ratcheted up the pressure that something be done about this, about these guys being in jail. Second thing, which George Gascon, the district attorney of Los Angeles County, just did. He has recommended that they be resentenced, right? And he claims that this is done all the time. And he had a press conference just last week or 2 weeks ago here in LA. And he talked about instances when this is done. And the idea is that they would be resentenced, and the recommendation would now not be life without parole. It would be life with parole. And because they were younger than 26 when they were charged and have done 30 years in jail already or something like that, they would immediately be eligible for parole. Now, that doesn't mean they would get parole. And that's apparently, I can actually speak to that, having testified at parole board hearings. That's a long process. You know, the parole board has to set a hearing date, which is sometimes quite a bit in the future. Then they make a recommendation. It goes to the governor, and the governor can say yes or no. The other thing is now that just happened a couple days ago is clemency, right? There is now talk that the governor should just, what is that called? Commute the sentences, or what is that actually called, Mark? Clemency, or is it just clemency? You're just going to wipe the charge away.
Clemency means it's wiped off. That you're free. The commute would be to reduce the sentence. Yeah, but clemency is a different story where they're free and clear.
Yes, so that's an option that's now on the table, and the governor has said he's aware of that. I don't know what'll happen with that. Mark, talk about, you're a little more dialed into politics probably than I am. Talk about the timing of this with the election. I guess we're dropping this show on election day. So with today's election and the district attorney of Los Angeles being up for re-election and his struggles to get re-elected.
Yeah. But let me be frank here. I think that George Gascon is a sick man. And I put nothing past him when it comes to utilizing, this opportunity for his own political gain. That may sound very, very cold and calculated, but that's what I believe. It may sound very cynical is what I was looking for. But I want you to think about this. When you think about, first of all, let's go back to TikTok for a minute. And TikTok is a phenomenon. It's contemporary, but there's always been what we call the court of public opinion. That's nothing new. The avenues, the conduit that exists for those opinions, are new with social media. But my belief is that George Gascon, when you think about this, when he's talking about just resentencing, what he's doing here, he is trying to play both sides of the defense bill, because asking for a resentencing, it's not saying, hey, release him today, but I think they've served enough time, and because of circumstances and blah, blah, blah. What he wants to do is he certainly wants to play to one part of the voting population, say, yeah, you're right. There's something a little bit wrong with this, or justice has been served. Let's go and start the process. And now let's turn it over to somebody else with the parole board and the governor. And he can do this before election day, so he can say, I've done something. At the same time, he doesn't want to piss off everybody else and say, hey, these two guys should die in prison, and get them out and ask for clemency tomorrow, so to speak. So he can go into election day saying, hey, I'm doing something about this, but I'm not going all the way. This is a guy who stands for nothing but, in my opinion, chaos. The other thing about this, when you think about all the crime in Los Angeles, and really all of the chaos is going on because, and I mean because of George Gascon. When you think about the murderers of police officers, the widow of one of them I've had on my program, Your Leo Nation, that were released, that were on the street because of George Gascon's policies, because of his decision to put these people back on the street when they should have been in crime, should have still been in prison or at least county lockup for crimes they committed. They get out and they kill police officers. But this is what he has time for, to plead for these two murderers to be resentenced. This goes to the despicable nature of this person. So I give him a big 0 on actual authentic law enforcement concerns, and 100% on what can I do for myself politically right now, given the election. So that's where I stand with this. As far as the clemency, I honestly, I know people will probably disagree with me on this one. I don't think that Newsom will grant it. I don't think that he will grant it. I really don't.
I don't either. No, I don't either.
Because there's nothing to be gained for Newsom with this. Now, is Newsom just about as political as Gascon? Yeah, but he's not a dummy either. And I'm sure that Newsom wants to run for president one day before his golden oily hair turns gray. He would like to run for president. And there's no benefit in the future for him to saying, hey, I went ahead and gave clemency to these two convicted murderers. There's nothing for him. And there's really nothing detrimental if he doesn't do anything. He leaves them there. It all kind of goes away. After all the uproar is gone and all the interest dies down, it'll be forgotten. The only way it'll be remembered if he does something substantial by actually getting these guys out of prison. So I don't think that'll happen. And I think you're right with the parole process. It's going to take a long, long time if it goes that way, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what more there is to say about it. I think they have been, by all accounts, model inmates. So if there is, I do feel like, if there is an application for parole, I think they would likely get it.
Yeah. Bill, and again, I know I just went on a big spiel here, but the model inmate thing, I think that is really important for certain offenses. I really do. I really do. I think it's very important for certain offenses. There are other offenses, in my humble opinion, where model inmate should mean 0. 0. Susan Smith, I forget which date it was, but I don't know, 25 years ago, right? She murdered, she drowned her 2 young boys, children, pushed her car into a lake and tortured them with drowning because she wanted her boyfriend. She was married, and her boyfriend said, well, I don't want any kids in my life, and blah, blah, blah. So she killed her 2 innocent children in order to satisfy the wishes of her boyfriend. Now, by all accounts, she has been an absolute model citizen, and I hope she dies in prison.
Right. Right. It's a good point you bring up.
By the way, of extreme old age. I want her to live as long as possible and die in prison. So model citizen, to me, it's a so what.
That's probably a good place to leave it. A parent who killed their children. When we talk about a case of children who killed their parents, was there abuse or was there not abuse? If there was abuse, was it substantial enough to mitigate the crime of murder? I'm interested to hear what people say in our comments. November 26th is the next day in court for the brothers, and that's when we'll hear more about this effort to resentence them. Stay tuned, folks. As I said, drop a comment. Let us know where you stand on this case. If you think there was abuse, and if there was, is there some mitigating factor there that should cause this to have been a manslaughter case as it was charged the first time, and not just a capital murder case as it was charged the second time? Chief, thanks for your insight. Always appreciate it, my friend.
Always fun.
All right. Take care, folks.